everyone. Welcome. This is episode 356 of Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE Tailgate Network. I'm James, joined this week by Ryan and Spencer. We're doing this on a rainy, dreary Sunday morning. See how that affects the Packers game upcoming. But other than that, how you guys been? Spencer, it's been a couple of weeks since we had you on. How you been?
Yeah, been good. Got through our mini camps for my coaching job, which was good. Got to see some of the guys again and check in on progress made throughout the offseason so far. But otherwise, I watched some of the World Series and I've watched a lot of football since then. And that's basically been my life. So that's all I've been up to.
Yeah. So did anybody take a big leap forward? Anybody coming in with a couple more ticks of velo on their
teaching airbenders over there?
No.
Yeah. In the 1 month I didn't see them. No, we didn't see too big a jumps. We saw good progress. They've been working hard. I can at least tell they've been doing stuff. So that's a positive for me.
Yeah. I didn't get to see a ton of the World Series. I got to see bits and pieces. Especially like I didn't get to watch the last game at all because I was at a concert with Steve. So we missed all of that weird drama, and I had to go back and rewatch that inning and go, wow, what would it have been like to, because all I saw was on my phone app. It was 5-0, and then all of a sudden it was 5-5, and I went, oh, what happened here? And I had no idea it was all of that. So I was very happy with the
I actually
outcome.
turned it off when it was 5-0. Yeah.
Oh, you just decided, this is going back to LA.
Yeah. It was like 5-0 Yankees. They got this. Dodgers had nothing going. And yeah, likewise, I checked my phone after and it was like, wait, it's tied late. And I think, it was even after the Yankees came back again to take the lead 6-5, right? And yeah, I had turned it off and then turned it back on, saw the last couple of sack flies in the end of it, but I missed all the melodrama. So, sloppy. The Yankees deserve to lose. I think we can all agree on that. And yes. I know Ryan's happy about that too.
Yeah, if not like directly, at least cosmically always. So that's, yeah. But in this case, it did seem like they directly deserved to lose because there was some stuff that came out afterwards about the Dodgers scouting reports, which was almost like rubbing it in their face about how they were just like, yeah, the Yankees are a collection of talent, but they're not actually really good at like playing ball. So that was like, ooh, hey, take your nose and rub it right in there. Sports talk radio, WFAN must just have lit up like a Christmas tree about that stuff. So that had to be amusing for people that like that sort of pain.
Yeah, and from what I gathered too, this was sort of like the culmination of, the Yankees fans who watched every game every year, knowing that was the weak link of the team, just kind of praying you can get through the World Series without it biting you, and it ultimately did. So, just ugly. And then we'll see where the Yankees go from here because, Garrett Cole opted out of his deals. So unless the Yankees want to give him, $36 million for like an age 38 season now, I don't know about that. And then there's the Juan Soto sweepstakes that are already starting. So could be a lot of interesting times in free agency, at least at the start here. We'll talk some offseason stuff coming up, but first, before we get into that, reminder, as always, you can become a patron. Go to patreon.com/MKE Tailgate. Help us out for as little as $2 a month. That level guarantees you get your questions answered both here and on reporting as eligible. The $5 level gets you that question priority perk, plus the additional exclusive content, the Minor League Extra with Spencer and Ryan, as well as Paul's Packers mini pods every Friday. So we also need to remind folks that the recent change in the Patreon iOS app, if you're not a patron already, please, for your own sake, do not sign up through the Patreon iOS app. Go do it on the desktop. Ryan, why is that?
Yeah, because you may be charged up to like 30% apparently, some sort of fee through them, even though they're not really doing anything. So it's it behooves you not to sign up through the app. We believe, I would like to hear from some people who have seen it process and go through. If you were previously signed up, that shouldn't affect things. It should be okay. But we don't have that confirmed so far. I haven't heard directly yet on that. But definitely do not sign up through an iOS app now unless you really do feel like giving Apple 30% of of the money just for no reason whatsoever. So yeah, it is in your best interest to just sign up on a desktop or sign up in a browser and not sign up through the app.
All right. As mentioned, World Series ended. Wild game on Wednesday. Then the offseason got off to a pretty hot start right away because, as we mentioned last week, teams only have 5 days after the end of the World Series to make decisions on contract options and all that business up front. So we're recording this, as I mentioned, on Sunday morning. So there's a good chance that some of this will be out of date by the time you listen to it on Monday or whenever you usually catch us during the week. Since there are still some decisions out there to be made as of now. Brewers have until Monday to decide on Devin Williams' $10.5 million option. We talked about some of the trickiness there because they could send them back to arbitration for less if they really wanted to poke that bear. They've got their end of the Frankie Montas mutual $20 million option, a lot more than $20, $20 million option for Frankie Montas. And apparently Eric Haas has an option that no one really knew about. That's supposedly $3.5 million, and he's only projected by MLB trade rumors to make 1.8 in arbitration. So don't know if that will be picked up either, but that's where things stand now. In terms of the deals that have been taken care of, Rhys Hoskins exercised his $18 million player option, as we talked about last week. That was like the surest thing of all sure things this Brewers offseason to happen, closely followed by the Brewers quickly picking up Freddie Peralta's $8 million option for next year. Both of those no-brainers. So, obviously, Spencer, not a lot of surprises on those decisions, but do you think Rhys Hoskins makes it to opening day with the Brewers, or do they try to do something like they did with Hunter Renfroe and see what they can get for him?
I think the Brewers will probably be open to, offers from other teams if they're coming in. My guess is that there won't be many coming in for Rhys at $18 million coming off the season he just had. I think he's a pretty prime bounce back candidate. So there might be a team, a big market team who can afford to take that risk, who maybe would come in and have some interest. But my guess is that Rhys Hoskins is a Brewer on opening day, and that's just how it works out this offseason. But like I said, I wouldn't be completely shocked if it happens. And I do think the Brewers would probably be open to the idea if somebody comes calling. It's just a matter of if there's actual interest, and I'm not anticipating a lot of it.
Yeah, so we already saw that the Angels are out there, and they're doing their typical Angels stuff, which is to get old players. I guess in this case, they didn't really give up a young player, but they did give up Griffin Canning to get Jorge Soler. And so I immediately saw people were asking me on Twitter, and it was immediately a discussion point, will Rhys Hoskins be an Angel? And I kind of hope they don't do that to him, like specifically like do that to him, because I don't know that you want to get into the habit of, in these sorts of situations, sending guys to, the equivalent of baseball Siberia for, guys who kind of sign in good faith and whatever. I mean, players have to know if they don't sign a no trade clause that trades can and do happen. So they have to kind of know that stuff. But that one feels like I really would want to like just do that to him. First of all, I kind of like the guy, and sending him to Anaheim to have his soul sucked from his body just seems like not a cool thing to do to somebody you like. Like, I just don't want that. But also I think there could be bad ramifications for signing the next guy. So maybe not the best idea, but it probably wouldn't happen anyway, just because even the Angels, there has to be a limit to what they would do and what they would be willing to take on in those situations. So I don't know. I think that it is pretty unlikely. I think he's probably back with the Brewers for next year. And then you hope that he does the Jesse Winker second year removed from surgery bounce back. Like that's what everybody's got their fingers crossed for. And there's frankly a pretty decent chance for it. There's a fairly decent chance that does happen. So he's not particularly old. I think he'll be playing next year at 32. So I think that you can legitimately hope that is going to be the case.
I guess also unexpected news, the Brewers declined their end of a couple of team options, both Gary Sanchez and Wade Miley. They'll still have to pay a total of $5.5 million in that, I guess, quote unquote, dead money that we talked about for the buyout. So it comes down to $4 million to Sanchez and $1.5 to Miley, to them in 2025. So that's $5.5 million already to players who will not be on the opening day roster on next year's payroll. So we did talk about that situation a little bit on last week's pod, but I guess, Spencer, since you weren't here, any concerns on just how much salary may be going to players who won't be on the roster next year with these mutual or options being declined?
Not particularly. I mean, this is kind of a standard thing for most teams, but also for the Brewers. The Brewers have been doing this on a lot of contracts recently where they like to push the money out a year. And I think they could do the same thing this offseason if they want to, make up for the 5.5 that they have to pay this year. They can push 5.5 in contracts and buyouts into next season and kind of make it a, net zero. It doesn't really matter in the end if you do the same thing on new contracts. So I think it's one of those things. It's a big NFL thing everyone talks about, but like just pushing the money down the road, and eventually you just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, and it doesn't really end up hurting too much. And this isn't any type of money that's going to completely hamper them this year anyway. I mean, $5.5 million isn't nothing, but it's something you can work around. It shouldn't keep you from signing anybody you really, really want to sign. So I don't have many concerns about it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the fact that they'll just push it out, but of course they will. They'll just push it to the next year and whatever. Though they've already got some of that because Rhys Hoskins, when they decline his mutual option for next year, either they or he or both of them decline the mutual option for next year, there's already $4 million for Rhys Hoskins out there for 2026. There's also for this year, whatever. So there was some weirdness about the Brewers making a trade with that Junis trade. I think the Reds are picking up some of Montas's buyout, maybe. I'm not exactly sure how the money on all that worked, but
that sounds about right.
Yeah, there's something going on with that as well. So I don't know that it was ever fully disclosed exactly what was happening. But the Brewers did this with Jacob Junis as well, and I think that was part of why they traded him away. Was I think they had like a $3 million buyout on his 2025. So I think that was part of why they traded Junis away too. Yeah, this isn't. It seems like it's SOP at this point. It's just the way that teams handle this stuff. The Brewers have been traditionally fairly good about avoiding dead money, though. Obviously, like Ryan Braun is getting paid every July 1st. He has his own little Gary Sheffield day every July 1st. And Yelich has also got a bunch of deferred money. But those are big contracts as opposed to, and that's long-term deferrals, as opposed to this, which is just, pushing some of the money back a year. It seems like an accounting trick. It also seems like something that teams kind of do to get around the cap when you're talking about teams that are, the luxury tax. When teams are in the luxury tax above that point, that some of that stuff is done, but that obviously doesn't apply to the Brewers. So, though it can apply to the contracts in terms of who you're trading and what you're trading them for, like with the Rhys Hoskins situation, that $4 million might matter to a team that could potentially theoretically be interested in him. So yeah, it does just seem like it's SOP and whatever at this point. But the payroll situation is very murky for this year because we just don't know what they're going to be spending based on what happened with the TV money. So I guess we'll find out come, the opening of camp. But even then, it might not be totally done at that point because they've been known to sign guys into camp too. So I guess we'll find out in looking back where they end up.
Circling back to the Montas trade, so the money changing hands that you may remember was the Brewers sending $1 million to the Reds as part of the deal because Frankie Montas's buyout was $2 million and Junis's was $3 million. So the Brewers chipped in $1 million to basically even those out for the Reds. That was the deal. So Brewers didn't get money for Montas; they sent money to the Reds.
So actually, the number is not 5.5 million; it's 7.5 million. So even a little bit higher. Okay.
Yep. So I guess the most unanticipated or surprising move so far of the post World Series decision making has been the Brewers deciding to waive Colin Ray. He had, I guess maybe not so conveniently, a $5.5 million contract option for next year with a $1 million buyout. They put him on waivers right away, as opposed to just declining that option. So we'll see again in the next day or two if somebody picks him up on waivers and takes the opportunity to pay that $5.5 million. Otherwise, the Brewers could also try to trade him. So I guess, first of all, Spencer, how surprised were you that they opted to waive him? And do you see, a trade or somebody else picking him up with the intent to sign him and getting the Brewers off the hook? I mean, obviously, Colin Ray has been one of their most dependable starters over the last couple of years, but also really faltered towards the end of this year as he hit that career high in innings. So I guess, do you feel like this is a scenario where the Brewers feel like they can just create another Colin Ray and don't need this one?
Yeah, I think my initial reaction was to be pretty surprised by it happening. I had kind of penciled him in as like almost a sure thing for somebody to be back on next year's roster. That was kind of how I was looking at it. But when you think about it and you look at it from the perspective of the Brewers have done this with other players, Brad Boxberger, Chase Anderson, when guys, nobody was really expecting them to, well, they waived Boxberger. It was very similar with Boxberger, but everyone expected Anderson and him to be back, and they decided to move on, and they ended up being proven correct on both of those guys. I think they're looking at it from a perspective of Ray being, I think they probably saw the end of the season and think whatever internal analytics, whatever mechanical stuff, whatever just age curve things that they worry about, that they think he's more in line with what they saw at the end of the season than what they saw throughout the majority of the season. And to be fair, they sort of ran him into the ground last year in terms of innings and putting him at a career high in innings that he had never hit at his age. So I think they just think he's over the hill, really, is all they're doing here, and they're just ready to move on. I don't know how much money played an equation. I think if he was like $2 million next year, yeah, they'd probably bring him back just to hope he can continue to eat innings. But my guess is somebody's going to pick him up. I think just looking at the surface numbers and what he did last year, some team is going to view him as somebody that could give him 140 innings of decent starting pitching this year at a reasonable cost. And whether that's a trade for a lotto ticket type of player, or if it's just straight up claiming him off of waivers, I'm not sure on that, but I do think my guess would be that he does not make it through waivers if I had to make a guess. So we'll see what happens, but I think the Brewers did it this way to see what his market is, one, and also if someone takes him off their hands, they don't have to pay that buyout, that $1 million buyout, which is at least one extra million they don't have to worry about in next year's budget.
Yeah. So, okay. So the Ray thing, first off, there are already people I think it was Red Legs Nation. I saw that. Yeah, the SB, like, they're already calling for that to happen because Colin Ray probably pitched well against them, and they were like, why can't we get a Colin Ray? And the thing about Colin Ray, I think you're 100% right on this, to sort of assume that, one, next year's going to be his age 34 year, and he was pushed harder than he had been ever pushed before in terms of innings, 167 and 2/3 innings this last year. And I think you're probably right to think that they're anticipating a fall off and him not being quite as good as he was last year. And also, Jaymes, like you mentioned, the idea that, well, they could just seemingly create Colin Rays. The other thing that popped into my mind about this is I think this drastically increases the likelihood that, and you're not going to necessarily love this, Spencer, but I think this drastically increases the likelihood that Bryce Wilson comes back on with the $1.5 million or whatever that he is owed. Because honestly, if you look at Bryce Wilson's, just his production, what he did, I'm looking and comparing him to Colin Ray right now, their lines. Colin Ray had a 4.29 ERA. Bryce Wilson had a 4.04 ERA. The strikeouts per 9, 7.2 for Colin Ray, 7.1 for Bryce Wilson. The walks, a little bit higher for Bryce, but 2.7 versus 2.3. The home runs, almost identical, 1.7 for Bryce, 1.6 for Colin Ray. They kind of already, like, Colin Ray isn't that different from Bryce Wilson in a lot of, like, in terms of just pure production. Bryce Wilson just wasn't that different from Colin Ray, and they can keep him and pay him a heck of a lot less. And I think that is the direction that this is going to go. I think they feel comfortable with Bryce Wilson. We don't necessarily feel comfortable with Bryce Wilson, but, like, I think they do. And so I think that's probably this probably increases the chances that Bryce Wilson is coming back because, again, the money involved with Bryce Wilson is just not that much.
I guess along those lines, our first Patreon question this week comes from Michael Parr, who is asking, with the declining the option on Ray, what does this do to your expectations for who's in the rotation? So, Spencer, does Bryce Wilson say slide into that spot, or do you think they have something else in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't thought about it, but that does make a lot of sense. I think there is probably a decent chance that Wilson will be back. I'm still not sure they would feel comfortable enough with him to say, yeah, he's going to be in our rotation and we'll feel good about that. I think they would probably try and push him out of that. But looking at it, I think you have Freddie. I imagine Savali's going to be back at this point. I think one of Ray or Savali was more likely to be pushed out, but I would imagine Savali's back in part of the rotation. Tobias Myers should be in there. Hopefully you get a Brandon Woodruff that's good enough to be in the rotation, but I don't know that you can bank on that going into next year. And then I now will include Wilson in this group, but I think you're looking at the DL Hall, the Aaron Ashby, Bryce Wilson combination. I still think they're going to bring someone in externally. That's new. That's more what it's going to come down to. I don't know which way they'll do it. That might be a trade. That might be a free agent pickup, but I don't think that they want to go into the season with those as their only options at the start in the starting rotation. I think we'll see somebody new added to the mix, and it's probably pretty likely that the new person will end up being an actual starter for the Brewers next year. That would be my prediction looking at it right now.
Yeah, one thing that this does is it sort of opens up a spot where they can say to someone, look, if we bring you in, you're pretty much written down in pen going into the season as being in the rotation. There's at least one rotation spot that they can sell to free agents and say, hey, we have a real opportunity here for you to start. And maybe if you sign with, like, the Mets, you wouldn't necessarily, you'd be further down the pecking order. But there is some value too in being able to say, hey, we have some space for you here, because yes, they do have depth. If we assume that Wilson is back, and then obviously they're going to give Hall and Ashby a look. Those guys are starting depth options, not to say anything of the guys in the minors below that, like like Rodriguez and, say, Logan Henderson, some guys like that who could also work their way in. But this does open up space for them to be able to say, hey, look, we have a spot here. If you want an opportunity to prove that you can start and be a starter in the big league level, we can offer you really good defense to play behind. We can offer you really good coaching. We can offer sort of a guaranteed spot. So I think at least one guy like that, and then also they can then say to some other guys, hey, we have some room for you to be in the mix here. We don't have, like, a firm up, like, any agent and any player can just look at their situation and go, well, DL Hall hasn't established himself as a starter yet, or Bryce Wilson hasn't established himself as a no doubt starter. So other guys can be attracted to the situation as well. So this does give them that much coveted optionality, and they have something they can market here and say, hey, we have an opportunity. If you come here, we can give you some leash to be able to start. So I think there's value in that as well.
They can also market in terms of, look at what we've done for guys like Colin Ray or others, where, our system's proven. If you're thinking, you may be on your last shot, we can help fix you and help you get another contract, basically. That has some value there as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Another Patreon question. Jay Google asking, any surprises so far on player club mutual options? I think we kind of went through a lot of these. Not terribly surprised that say they didn't want to bring Gary Sanchez back, Spencer. Anything come to mind other than the Ray thing?
No, I think Ray was the one that caught me a little off guard. All the other ones were pretty much exactly what I would have anticipated both sides doing from a player or team perspective.
Yeah, the Ray thing, the way I put it on Twitter when I saw the news was, got to admit I'm surprised by this, and I probably shouldn't be, just knowing the way the Brewers do things. We should just sort of assume that they're going to do some things that we don't necessarily anticipate. They definitely don't value certainty or they don't see past production as certainty the way that we all, I think, view it. You know what I mean? They don't look at what Colin Ray did last year and go, well, yeah, you're just going to get that again this next year. That is not how they look at things, because that's not the way that like projection systems would look at things. When you have a sort of surprisingly good season from somebody like Colin Ray, really the last 2 years, their judgment on that is still going to be skeptical. So we really shouldn't have been surprised, but I admit I was surprised by it. So I guess we just have to kind of get used to this being the way that things are done. And it works. As long as it's working for them, then I think it's hard to get too up in arms about it.
Last bit of player news before we head to the coaching side. Mequon is mourning this weekend as the Brewers traded Owen Miller to the Rockies for cash. Ryan, how will you remember Owen Miller?
I will try very, very hard to remember, what was it, May of 2023?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to try. Or was it 2022? It might have even been whatever that hot May he had. It was
that first month where he was hitting like 350 with a hard hit rate of like 2%.
Yeah,
it was 2023. I already looked it up.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to try to remember him as May of 2023. That is what I'm going to try to hold to my bosom with Owen Miller. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot more not May of 2023 than there was May of 2023. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it was that. I mean, same here. I'm going to try and remember him that way. But all I really remember from that time was kind of being annoyed, because even during that, there was so much insane luck involved that I knew everyone was going to get way too high on Owen Miller, and then we were going to have to deal with it when he started not being that version of himself, which was going to happen very quickly, and it did. He had like a 500 OPS in June that year, but I hate saying it, but like it wasn't his fault at all, but him being around just always bothered me because of how many people just gave him a pass on everything just because he was a local kid. And like, he's a great dude. He seems like a really good teammate, all of that stuff, but like, he was not good for almost every single moment he was on the Brewers, except for 1 month. And he got a lot of leash because of everyone knowing him and because of that month. So I'm glad he's gone, because now I don't have to hear about somebody going, why didn't they bring Owen Miller up whenever a trade happened, or whenever anything happens with a utility infielder for the Brewers. I can just not have to deal with that anymore. So that's good on my part.
May 2023, Logan Miller hit 363, 395, 600 for a 995 OPS on a 391 BABIP. Oh, man. He had a walk rate of 3.5%. That man was just swinging it at everything, and it found every hole.
Yep.
And I remember a lot of that OPS just being like triples and doubles into the corner, right? Like, wasn't even home run power. It was just fluky extra base hits.
He hit a few homers, but they all they were wall scrapers. They were barely getting out down the corners and stuff. Like, it was nothing was sustainable about it. And obviously no one's going to actually hit 360 or whatever over the course of the season, but it was so unsustainable that I was just, you knew it was going to fall apart completely. And it was very funny because it fell apart on like June 1st. It was literally just May 1st to the end of May. And then he was just terrible right at the end of May. I don't know what happened, but it was some sort of magic in May for Owen Miller.
Very next month, June 2023, his OPS dropped 400 points. He hit 242, 289, 297. And that was still with a BABIP of 314. So he was still getting lucky at OPSing 585. Oh, man.
Yes, our very own Willie Bloomquist is gone. Long live Willie Bloomquist.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All right. Coaching side. Chris Hook sticking around. He signed a multi-year extension, so that's a relief. I guess I didn't even really know or realize that his contract was up, and that would have been a big one to lose. So he'll be sticking around to continue to run one of the most successful pitching programs in the game. I guess, Spencer, how big of a deal is this pitching coach to pitching coach, especially in light of some of the decisions being made in terms of, as we talked about, who they're keeping and who they're getting rid of?
Yeah, it's important. I mean, Jack and I talked about it on our podcast, but like, could the Brewers have survived with losing Chris Hook? Yes. But would there have been a drop most likely for at least a year or two? Yeah, probably. I mean, they have a bunch of internal, like really good internal options similar to Chris Hook. But if people remember back to 2019, the first year that Hook took over, it was not good. And there was a lot of concern about, we lost Derek Johnson. We brought up this Chris Hook guy. We got to get rid of Hook. Like, there were a lot of people who thought Hook needed to go before he even finished the season. And now I think most Brewer fans probably couldn't envision losing Chris Hook and how big of a deal that would be and how much it would be, it would be a negative. But like we talked about, I think there's always, the Brewers would have figured it out because they have been grooming future pitching coaches in the minor leagues. But there would have been a year or two where that would have not probably happened immediately at the major league level. So the fact that they don't have to deal with that and they have a guy who's very, very good at his job and there's not going to be this adjustment period, it's only a positive. I mean, it's really nice to see him back. I think he's a guy who seems like he's very comfortable. I know he talked to reporters. It's just, he knows the system. He works really well with what the front office wants and what everybody else in the organization wants to do. And they just work really well hand in hand. So he's comfortable. I think that was probably a big part of it for him, was just remaining in a place where he knows he's got the support of the organization, of the other coaches, and they just kind of know what each other want and what they're good at and what he can do to help certain pitchers. So I just think it's all very positive, and they would have survived without him, but I'd much rather have it this way and continue to have him as long as we can.
Yeah, I'd echo all of that. When you have a proven system in place and there's no real signs, outwardly at least, of that system kind of degrading or becoming worse in any real way anytime soon, yeah, if you can, you'd like to just keep playing that out and keep extending it. I think in some ways it's kind of like the Craig Counsell thing, where it's like, well, what forced their hand on that was this massive jump in salary and them deciding they could better use that money elsewhere. And I would imagine that keeping Chris Hook is something that is easier when you're not paying the man at the top $8 million a year for his services. And so there is kind of trade-offs and all of that involved here. And I think that you're perfectly happy to keep Chris Hook along. And what they're going to do, as Spencer kind of alluded to here, is they're going to keep bringing guys through and keep sort of building up this system. And I think we at this point can fairly confidently say that Chris Hook is a good person to have overseeing that, not just what's going on with the big league pitching staff, but sort of the organizational wide pitching philosophy. This seems to be in his wheelhouse. So yeah, I think this is just purely positive. Like, you do this and you're happy to have him back to continue running things and to keep this machine churning the way it has been.
On the other end, the Brewers did lose a coaching staff member that they likely wanted to keep. Quentin Berry is deciding to head south to Wrigley to reunite with Craig Counsell, this time as the third base coach in Chicago. But shortly after the season ended, we had Craig Counsell's purge of the Cubs coaching staff. Just because of the way the timeline went last year, he didn't really get a chance to hire his own guys. So as expected, They parted ways with a bunch of their coaching staff almost immediately after the season ended. Q Berry, the first one to join Craig Counsell in Chicago. I guess, how big of a deal is this, Spencer? I think he's gotten, some credit for helping the Brewers with their base stealing, that kind of thing. But, how much effect does really the base coach aspect have?
Yeah, I think in this particular case, Quentin Berry was very good at what he did, and he did help put in a really good set of systems for how the Brewers steal bases, how the Brewers run the bases, how a bunch of these young players have learned to do it at the major league level, and that matters. That's a big part of what he's done. I think he's been important in terms of the outfield defense too, because he had a big part in that too. But is it something that's irreplaceable? I don't think it is. I think it's something that, one, all these young guys aren't going to forget all of the stuff that Quentin Berry taught them over the last couple of years. Like that knowledge doesn't leave with Quentin Berry. And beyond that, I think the coaching staff has been around. Most of the returning staff, we don't know exactly who that'll be, but there's going to be more returners, are going to have knowledge of how this works. I think the Brewers are very good at hiring people for this type of job and doing a good job with that. So yes, they'll lose Berry, and I think I'll say this. I don't think it's going to affect their ability to really steal bases or to run the bases in general. I talked about this with Jack also, but I think the one thing you might lose here is that Quentin Berry himself was a fantastic base stealer who seemed to have a special sort of eye for certain things that pitchers were doing.
Sure.
And in a mid-game adjustment, he might have been somebody who could pick something up that a new coach might not be able to, just because they don't have that same level of personal experience. But over the course of a season, I bet you that maybe gains you 10 steals as a team. I don't think that's going to be a huge difference over the course of an entire season. So obviously in an ideal world, again, you probably would have kept Quentin Berry, but he got a bit of a promotion going from first to third base. He gets to work with somebody he used to work with in Craig Counsell, and he probably got a raise in the process. So good for Quentin Berry. I don't think it's going to hurt the Brewers, really. I think it's just more of in an ideal world, you would have kept him, but they'll survive just fine without him.
Yeah, my take on this is, if you're going to lose somebody, base coaches aren't a bad place to lose people. I think Berry is, by all accounts, good at his job. He does a good job. And the Brewers led baseball with the metric that Fangraphs uses, which is base running runs, I think is how they call it. Base running runs above average, which includes stolen bases and caught stealings, but also includes things like taking extra bases, how often you get toot bland, and all that. They did lead baseball with 19.7, which was a healthy lead over the next closest team, which was Cincinnati at 15.7. So they did legitimately add value on the base paths, and I think it's probably fair to say that Quentin Berry played a significant role in that. But there are lots of people out there that they can go out and find who can come in and keep going what he had going. And let's be honest, a big part of why the Brewers are good at this is they have a lot of really fast guys on this team. They have a lot of speed on the team. And they don't have a ton of really slow guys. Even William Contreras isn't slow for a catcher, right? He's not a slow running catcher, even by, I'm correct about that, right? Obviously catchers are going to be slower in almost every case, but he isn't a slow running catcher. So they're pretty good. Most of their players are, last year, even with at first base DH, they give quite a few plate appearances to Bowers, and Bowers is a pretty good base runner. He was for the position for first base DH is, I would say almost an exceptional base runner for those positions. So yeah, a lot of this comes down to personnel, and it's not just going to immediately vanish. And if you find somebody who's good at this, I like the idea of having fresh blood coming in to the organization to keep bringing in new people, to bring in new ideas. There is probably a good chance that they do fill this internally, but that just sort of keeps the pipeline moving for them. It just kind of keeps pushing things forward. And I kind of like the idea of using the base coach positions as, developmental places where you can develop up coaches and kind of bring in new blood like that. So I really don't worry about this one at all.
Ned Yost the fourth has been at Nashville for a few years. Maybe we'll see him get called up, so to speak. That'd be fun. All right. We do have a couple of Patreon questions about the coaching staff. So first, Jeffrey Emenacker asking, so it seems Ricky Weeks is being groomed as future manager, but why wouldn't it be Chris Hook? I guess, Ryan, in terms of the succession, so to speak, we knew, and they pretty much explicitly said that Ricky Weeks is sort of manager in waiting, right? But would it be out of the question to consider Chris Hook in a managerial role if he's that good at overseeing, entire organizations?
So I'm not going to say that pitching coaches don't ever become managers, because it has been known to happen. But the fact that I can name just like the handful that pop right to mind, John Farrell, who did win a World Series with the Red Sox. He was a pitching coach, very successful pitching coach with the Red Sox before he was elevated to manager. Larry Durker was a successful manager with the Astros, who was a pitching coach before he did that. But honestly, I can't think of anybody beyond those two.
Bud Black, was he a pitching coach?
Oh, yep, there you go. Bud Black is another. That's a good shout. Yep,
Yeah.
Bud Black definitely was a pitching coach. But as you can tell, I mean, this is not the normal route that things go. And I think working with pitchers and getting them to be, it's a technical skill set, and it's a thing that a lot of these guys sort of devote to that and aren't necessarily as involved with other aspects of the game, especially at this time. Like, it takes a lot to be a really good pitching coach. It takes a very specific set of skills to do that, and that skill set is growing all the time. Like, with the amount of technology and the fluency you need in being able to help guys to develop, and all of the things that we know about how being a pitcher works now. I think it's sort of a separate skill set. And so most guys that go down that path just end up sort of being, I guess, siloed in and doing that. I guess there's more flexibility with it. Like Derek Johnson was he was the manager at Vanderbilt before he came over to the pro side, right, Spencer?
No, he was actually the pitching coach at
the pitching
Vandy.
coach there.
Yeah.
Oh, really? So he wasn't even okay. That's wild. Yeah. So I think that in terms of like just the way that this tends to work, being a pitching coach is sort of viewed as a separate track and a separate thing. And so you don't see a ton of crossover there. And I don't know that like Chris Hook is necessarily even gotten involved in the things that he would need to get involved in and to pick up the kind of other skills and the other parts of being in the organization that you would need to sort of be on a manager track. So that's the best way that I can answer that. Spencer could probably add more to this because he's an actual pitching coach.
Not at this level, so I I don't have that type of input here, but I will say, like,
you don't want to manage?
I'd love to manage, but yeah, this is a different story. So for pitching coaches at this level, a lot of them want to remain pitching coaches, and I kind of feel like Hook kind of fits that bill. He has his niche. He's very, very good at what he does. He's also getting older. I think he's probably pretty content with where he is, where he doesn't want to become this new or take on this entirely new challenge where he's got to worry about both sides of the ball. He's got to worry about everything else that's happening around the team and leading the entire team and all of the stuff that comes with being a manager. A lot of pitching coaches at that level don't want to do that because there's so much work that they're already doing, and they are so completely in the weeds with it. They are going crazy with everything they have to worry about on the pitching side. They don't even want to go and start worrying about anything else. So I think that's really what it comes down to. I think the Brewers probably wouldn't be super interested in doing it because there hasn't been a lot of success with pitching coaches moving to a managerial role. And I would guess that Hook doesn't really have any interest in becoming a manager at any point either. I don't think either side would be super interested in it. So that's kind of how I'm viewing it. I think for both sides, everyone's happy with where Chris Hook is at, and there's no need to mess with that and move everyone else around and find a new pitching coach while you make him a manager. And now is Chris Hook going to be too involved with that pitching coach and stuff? Like, there's always that you have to worry about too. So yeah, I think everyone's pretty happy with where it is lined up right now.
The other thing that I would kind of wonder is, do you see more of a path for somebody like Walker McKinven to go in that direction and become like an all-around manager? You're nodding your head. Yeah. That somebody like that, where he is involved, like Walker McKinven is, and we should probably talk about this because I have such bad vibes about this right now. I think he's going to leave, and because it's what people keep saying.
Our next Patreon question can tackle that. Yeah.
Oh, does it actually deal with that directly? Okay. Never mind.
Ish.
Okay.
We can finish the thought with this question. Yeah, Lucre Suitcase asking, are there any other coaches you think Greg would try to poach besides Clinton Jerry? Not including Chris Hook with his extension. How worried should we be about this happening more in the next few years? Obviously, when you're good, you have a reputation of having a good system. We see this in football all the time. Assistants get rated. Walker McKinven is I guess what's the official title? The run prevention coordinator for the Brewers. So much more of an oversight role, kind of as you were alluding to, Ryan. And that might be the bigger issue if the Brewers were to lose him, right?
Yeah, I do worry about that. I really do, because it seems like he is a guy who he fills the gaps between like the pitching side of things and the catching side of things and the defensive side of things. His job is to be in that gap. And because they've been so exceptionally good at that, I do worry about losing him. And I do worry that a giant bag of money is going to be proffered from Wrigleyville and that he's going to have a hard time saying no to that. So yeah, I would feel a lot better if I knew there was an extension on the table for him, not on the table, but that he had an extension. Almost as good as I would feel about the Chris Hook thing. The McKinven thing, and honestly, it might even be more important because McKinven is younger, and I think there's more ascendancy there. So, yeah, McKinven is the one that I'm keeping my eyes on, very much so.
Yep, agreed. He's the one for me. Even going back to last year, he was somebody that I genuinely thought they should give a good look at as the manager for when that spot opened up. I thought McKinven was somebody they should look at. Now the Murph thing has worked out just fine, but even like with people saying, Weeks is the next guy, and actually we have talk about that later, so I won't touch on that. But like McKinven for me is the best managerial prospect in the Brewers coaching system when I look at everything else, and I just feel like he's the one who ends up being a manager down the road, whether it's with the Brewers or somewhere else. He just has experience in pretty much every realm of what you need to worry about as a manager, because he's done some help with the offensive side of the ball in previous years. And now he's, like we talked about, he's the run prevention guy. He works with the defense. He works with the catchers. He works with the pitchers. Like, he's got experience with everything that a manager needs to worry about on their side of the job. So, like, he's the guy that I agree I could see the Cubs coming in with a big lump of cash and saying, we will give you whatever title you want to make it here, and we'll just give you this, and we'll make sure that we get you into a position where you are helping our team as much as we can. The good news is I always thought maybe he would be the next pitching coach for them, but they did hold on to their pitching coach. So maybe that makes it a little less likely, but yeah, I don't know. He's the one that I agree, Ryan. I would really like to see news on him staying at some point soon. That would be the most ideal news I could get, even honestly, player or coaches right now. I really would like Walker McKinven to be on the staff next year.
I mean, hell, the Yankees could definitely use a Walker McKinven too after watching the World Series. All right, let's move on to other Patreon questions this week. Steve Romanesco is writing, early on in the announcement, it felt like there was a lot of food on Weeks as the associate manager, and Murph was only going to be around for a short while until Weeks had the experience needed. Since then, it feels like we don't hear a lot about Weeks in the season, and Murph is getting a lot of praise. With that, how long do you think Murph is around, and how would you rate, if possible, Weeks' performance? So, yeah, I mean, there was sometimes, I think, during the year, Spencer, where like they would have Weeks be the available interview to talk, about strategy, post game, whatever, kind of get his feet wet in that sense. There were some notable ejections of Pat Murphy during the year where Ricky got to sit in the chair for a little bit. But I guess, how do you evaluate a bench coach, especially a rookie, so to speak, bench coach, and how they're doing?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's pretty much impossible to. We know what he kind of does, and that honestly, one of the biggest things they talked about was him being a really good sounding board for young players who, because
Sure.
he's been through it, he's gone through it as a top prospect, he's gone through it as a guy who had some struggles and some injuries and all these different things he dealt with throughout his career. And from that perspective, I know a bunch of the young guys that brought him up, and Murph talked about how much he communicates with them. And so like that's a positive for Ricky. But in terms of what else he was doing, we never really learned a ton about it other than just kind of being Murph's right-hand man, which before Murph took over the managerial spot, we didn't really know what Murph was doing as the bench
Sure.
coach, other than just kind of at that time being seen as kind of a mentor for counsel and that type of stuff. And obviously from his perspective, it was kind of bringing a bit of, humor and that type of stuff to the table where he could keep things calm and keep things loose and all of that stuff. But from a baseball perspective, you don't know exactly what the associate head coach is, what they're calling them, or the bench coach,
Sure.
or whatever you want to say. Unless you have a specific title, it's hard to say what they're actually doing other than just kind of assisting the manager in whatever they need. So from that perspective, everything went well. They won a bunch of games, so I guess he did a good job. But like, I can't really say what I can't give any grade on a performance or anything. And in terms of the Murph, how long will he be around and all of that? I think as long as he's healthy and the Brewers keep winning games and he wants to keep managing, I don't think they're going to force him out to put Ricky in the spot. I think they're going to let Murph manage while he can, while things are going well. And then when that changes, then maybe Ricky gets the job. But I don't think it's anything where they have it set, Murph gets these 3 years and then it's Ricky Weeks' job. I don't think that's how it's laid out in the Brewers' mind or just in reality.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. It's really hard when he doesn't have a specific area where you can go, okay, this is his area of responsibility. The way that like McKinven has run prevention. Okay, yes. Well, let's look at sort of the intersection of pitching and defense and catching and all of that and see how that goes. Oh, it's going really well. Well, Walker McKinven seems to probably be doing his job well. So you can sort of look at that. Obviously, the pitching side of things, Hook is doing a good job. But as you and Jack pointed out on the other podcast this week, it's not always just a matter of results too. That as we saw with the hitting coach changeover, right? The fact that they let Ozzie Timmons go and they brought up Al LaBeouf and now have a 3-headed pitching coach situation and all of that. Mm-hmm. I think that it's worth sort of remembering that process it really matters too, and that would be where Ricky Weeks is doing his work, is in sort of the process thing. And just as you said, we don't get to see that. That's not something that we get to evaluate. So it's basically impossible to evaluate from the outside what Ricky Weeks' contributions are, how good, how indispensable he is to this organization is fundamentally impossible for us to say. So we don't even have the advantage of he has a specific area that's his that we could go, oh, well, how good is he at that area? We don't even have that to work with. So it's pretty much a black box to us. So we just don't know exactly what's going on with him. So we're sort of at the mercy of, I guess, the little tidbits that are come out and are said. But yeah, I don't see Weeks as necessarily like the successor in waiting, especially I don't know if Murphy were to step aside and say Walker McKinven is still on the staff, would it necessarily go to Weeks over McKinven? I don't even know that would necessarily be the case. So we just really don't know. It's very hard to judge what those guys do when they're not specifically involved in a specific thing.
Shifting back over to offseason roster strategy, JVT is asking on Patreon this week. Seems like the Brewers have a lot of different options when looking to fill out their infield production for next season. One player does not need to match or outperform the hole left by Willy Adames' departure, but a bulk of those numbers do need to get filled somewhere. So JVT is asking, what are the best options to replace Willie's production? Is it find a third baseman, find a shortstop, or find a second baseman? Also, thanks for another great season. Always glad to have y'all be the soundtrack to my Monday commutes. Appreciate that. But uh yeah, every time somebody leaves, right? Like last offseason, we had this talk too of like, how do you fill the hole left by presumably Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff, XYZ? Like those numbers do need to be accounted for, and that can have some ripple effects down the roster too. So Spencer, I guess, how would you go about filling that production, assuming Willie is gone? Because he's gone.
Yeah. So first I would say second base is kind of the spot I would rule out. I don't want Bryce Terang to end up at shortstop. I just don't think he would be nearly as valuable as a shortstop. So keep him at second. So you're looking for somebody on the left side. Whether that's third or short, I don't think that necessarily matters, because I think Ortiz can be fine at third or short and would do a good job at either spot. So that's fine. I'm good with either of those. It's not going to be a wide open, obvious market for a bunch of guys for those spots. Like there's not going to be clear cut, obvious, like, oh, we should just bring him in and that would easily fill the production for Willie. Like there's not going to be a guy out there like that. So it's going to have to be somewhat creative. I keep coming back to Ryan McMahon at third base. I think that would be a good fit. That won't cost a ton, or shouldn't cost a ton. It is the Rockies. You never know what they're going to ask for in return, but it shouldn't cost a ton. But yeah, they're going to have to get creative, I think, to fill it. And some of it's going to have to be internal improvements to fill some of these Willie Adames numbers. Like a better season from Rhys Hoskins will go a long way towards helping fill some of that production. Ortiz having a better, he was great through June, and then that neck thing pops up. Like if he can be closer to that version of what we saw in May and June, that will help the production too. And you can make up for it that way. And some of the young outfielders might be a little bit better over the course of this next season. Like you can fill the production that way, but you need to at least get somebody who's serviceable or better to fill this hole, so that you're not trying to make up for it completely internally. And that's going to be the question. I can't give a ton of really good options. Suarez would have been a good one, but the D-backs picked up his team option this year, so he was one I would have maybe looked at if he got declined. It won't be easy. I think they're going to have to get creative, and honestly, the Brewers have usually done a pretty good job of that. And I will still continue to point back to Oliver Dunn as a guy that I think could surprise some people next year. It's funny. I view him very similarly to Garrett Mitchell as like a profile. Although I'm much lower on Mitchell than consensus, I feel like I'm a lot higher than consensus on Oliver Dunn, because I think they're pretty similar. It's just that Dunn didn't have the type of, I think he had some bad luck involved in his first stint. He got hurt. He missed most of the season. So everyone remembers his bad stint. Whereas for Mitchell, a lot of it was like, oh, he had really good numbers and then he got hurt. So everyone remembers his good stint. But I think if you look at the profiles, it's a very fast player. Both are very fast. Both play really good defense. Both have a decent amount of swing and miss, but both have a lot of pop in their bat. And it's a matter of if you can make that home run production and if they can get the bat to the ball a little bit more often. Like I believe in Mitchell more than Dunn overall, but I think in comparison to where they're viewed by the fan base and by everyone else, I think I'm higher on Dunn in comparison. So that's a name that I think people are forgetting, and I do think it has a chance to help the team a decent amount next year.
Yeah, I do. I've taken to heart your talk about Dunn and the idea that it's good to have him around. I love having him in the mix as somebody. I don't know that I would want to rely on him. I don't want him to be option one in terms of wanting to have like 500 plate appearances going to him for sure in the thing. But if he is your second option, if he's in the mix to be part of the infield crew, I think that there's potentially a lot of value there, that you could see a turnaround from him and those sorts of things. So yeah, I was going to say the biggest thing is not even looking at trying to replace, you can't replace what Willie Adames brought, like especially at shortstop, the power. You're not going to replace that. But where you can potentially get it is hopefully Rhys Hoskins is better. Hopefully, Jackson Churio takes the next step, because ultimately Jackson Churio's season-long numbers were very good for his age, but they were just kind of, good overall. They weren't, he was a superstar the last 4 months, but those first 2 months weigh so heavily that if he is a superstar for the whole year, that's a different level of production, and that goes a long way to making that up. And then guys like Sal Frelick getting a full year there, Garrett Mitchell hopefully getting a full year there. Guys like that, I think, can make up a lot of that difference too. But
Yelich, I even forgot Yelich. Like, we missed a half season of Yelich.
Yeah, we missed a half season of Yelich, and who knows what that back surgery, where he's going to be coming out of that, is just, again, a complete wild card. So we don't know. So there's lots of different things that can happen here, and there's also going to be other changes to the roster. We always underrate the number of changes that are going to be made, and we know that this team does a lot of roster shakeup. So something unexpected is going to happen too. So we just have to wait and see what that is. But yeah, I think that this is definitely a case of the Moneyball movie. We can make it up in the aggregate. Like that's what this is going to have to be. Is it's making it up in the aggregate, because you can't just replace shortstops who hit 30 bombs the way that Willy Adames did. They don't grow on trees. They just don't.
No, they never existed in Brewers history until Willy Adames. So, that just to show that point. Mark Podscarby is asking, it seems like this will be a fairly quiet offseason in Mark's estimation. Are there major things we're looking for, or are the only major things we're looking for is the Adames replacement and possible Devin Williams trade? Maybe another starting pitcher? Anything else? Ryan, you mentioned earlier you think they might peruse the starting pitcher markets, and then I think we're all on the same page that Devin Williams is probably getting traded at some point. But
yeah,
anything else on that list to mention, or anything else on your mind this offseason?
I think they're going to look to improve the roster in any way that they can. They're going to look to upgrade sort of across the board. They are in the position, I've mentioned this a lot on here, this idea of optionality. They are in a position where they don't have to do a lot. Yeah, they need to bring an infielder in, somebody who could play the left side like Spencer said, but that is a pretty high level of optionality. They don't have to get necessarily a surefire starter. They need depth there to add to what they already have. They need to bring in options for that, but they don't necessarily need any one specific thing. They have a pretty deep roster sort of across the board, so they're going to be looking to add in any way that makes sense, and that's a great position to be in, because it means you're not trying to plug holes and you're not trying to make up for something, and so you could sort of take what's there and what's out there and take advantage of opportunities that fall to you. And that's a good position to be in, and it's the hallmark of the Rays organization. It's the way Matt Arnold does business, and I am very glad for it.
Yeah, I think the only other specific thing I've looked at as a possibility is that I think there might be some bullpen reshuffling, mainly just to try and get more optionable arms into the equation because of how few they had this year. I think that made things really difficult on them. And I would imagine they want to try and make it a little bit easier in terms of especially not knowing exactly what you're going to get out of your rotation again. You want to be able to bring new arms in when needed in the pen. So I just kind of have this feeling that they're going to try and move some of the non-optionable arms and get some more guys in who can actually kind of ride the shuttle between Nashville and Milwaukee a little bit more consistently. But that's about it for beyond what we already talked about. I do think a starter will come too.
Yeah, let me ask you then, to be specific about that. So as far as non-optionable arms, who doesn't have options, who is part of the bullpen at this point? Piamps does not have options, correct, but is kind of firmly ensconced there. What is Peguero's option status? Because wasn't there a question about whether or not he would have another option?
Peguero does have an option heading into next year, so he'll be optionable. Hobie doesn't. I don't think Hobie will be back.
Yeah, Hobie's probably not. Piguero coming back is a lot more likely because of having that option, right?
I think so. Yeah, I would be surprised if he's not back because of that reason. And yeah, I mean, Wilson wouldn't have an option if they did that. Who am I thinking? I mean, if they trade Devin, that would actually help it a little bit because he doesn't have options and you could replace him with someone like that. But yeah, I mean, if they can create even just 3 spots in their bullpen, that is kind of, optionable. That makes it a lot easier over the course of the season. So my guess would be that's something they try and do this offseason.
Yeah, I think they basically have to have like 3 spots that are optionable. Just the way that they run things, the way they do things.
Yeah.
You kind of, I mean, maybe you could get away with only having 2 optionable out of the 8, but really it seems like 3 is a much more ideal number for them to be able to churn through guys.
Yeah.
According to Roster Resource, Bryce Wilson out, Nick Mears out of options. As you mentioned, Hobie. Brian Hudson should have 1 left, it looks like. Jared Canning will have 2. Trevor McGill still has 1, but obviously those are guys that you're not counting on optioning. Things are going very bad if those guys are optioned. And, as we mentioned, there are, for lack of a better word, options in the minors that could be that shuttle. Guys newly added to the 40, like once Yoho and Miz get there, they could be up and down a couple of times too. But to Spencer's point, you need those spots to put them in there in the first place. All right. Morgoth 10, our last Patreon question of the week, asking, what current Brewers are you inviting over for cribbage? This is a good question. I think as previously established, many of us here are bad Wisconsinites in that we don't really play a ton of, euchre or cribbage, at least speaking for myself. Spencer, I don't know if you're a big cribbage guy or not, but I know Jeff Lovering and Vinny Rattino had their season-long series they'd always talk about on the broadcast. So I guess if you were a cribbage person, who'd you invite over to play?
Yeah, I looked at this more just, playing cards or hanging out with guys doing this type of stuff. So
it's a social activity.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think back to the freshman series, and I remember during Sal Frelick's episode, they were playing cards, and Frelick seemed like a really fun guy to hang out with and play cards. He's pretty close to my age, so like everything just kind of fits with that one. So I think Frelick would probably be my choice out of everyone here. Just seems like a cool guy to hang out with.
I've just heard so many good things about Brandon Woodruff over the years that he seems like a good hang, right? Just to be having him in a game, whatever you're doing, he seems like he would be just the prototypical easygoing, like just there for the yucks sort of guy. So I think that one would be my pick. Like, it's hard to know any of these things real firmly, but Woodruff seems like a good pick for that.
All right, that'll do it for Patreon questions this week. A reminder, patreon.com/MKE Tailgate. If you are not a patron already, please do go sign up on your browser, not on your iOS app, and help us out there. $2 a month gets you the question priority. Make sure that you get your questions answered every week, both here and on Reporting as Eligible. Another way to support us for free, you can go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you're listening to this right now. Give us a 5-star review. That also greatly helps us out. So that'll do it for this week. As we mentioned, still waiting for a couple of option decisions here. I'm sure we'll talk about that next time. Spencer, thanks for hanging out with us again. Anything to plug, to steal a line from Paul?
Go check out the series on the top 20 prospects that were voted on by the Brewer Fanatic community. I've been writing up all of them. We're down to number 5, should be out soon here. And
nice.
Yeah, so we're working our way through that. And that one, I put a lot of effort into those, and there's a decent amount of probably stuff that isn't super available publicly in some of those. So check them out if you want to learn a little bit more about the system.
Definitely will do that. Thanks again, Spencer, for hanging out. We'll wrap things up here, see what other news, coaching staff wise or options wise comes out in the next week. We'll cover all of that next time here on Milwaukee's Tailgate. Have a good week, everyone. Stay well, okay?